Good afternoon, everyone. We are here today to discuss about the medieval period of music. We will also discuss about the monophonic music, Gregorian chant, organum, and some of the instruments used during this period. We have here a brief history of the medieval period. So the medieval period of music is the period from the years 500 to 1400s. It is also the longest period of music. And it runs right through from around the time of the fall of the Western Roman Empire to the beginning of the Renaissance. Medieval music covers a long period of music history that lasted throughout the Middle Ages and ended at the time of the Renaissance. The history of classical music actually begins in the medieval period. During the medieval period, or the Middle Ages, from roughly 500 AD to approximately 1400, is when musical notation began, as well as the birth of polyphony when multiple sounds came together and formed separate melody and harmony lines. Church or the sacred music dominated the scene, although some secular folk music heralded by troubadours were found throughout France, Spain, Italy, and Germany. Next. So we have here the monophonic music. Most of the medieval music was monophonic. In other words, there was only a single melody line. Monophonic literally means one sound. So the development of polyphonic music was a major shift towards the end of era that laid the foundations for Renaissance styles of music. The monophonic chant or the monophonic singing, which is based on a single unison melodic line, was popular from the very beginning of the medieval era. It dominated the early medieval period. Medieval music was both sacred and secular. During the earlier medieval period, the liturgical genre, predominantly Gregorian chant, was monophonic. Polyphonic genres began to develop during the High Medieval era, becoming prevalent by the later 13th and early 14th century. The development of such forms is often associated with the Ars Nova, which will be tackled on the next few slides.
Chant. Gregorian chant consisting of a single line of vocal melody, unaccompanied in free rhythm, was one of the most common forms of medieval music. This is not surprising given the importance of the Catholic Church during the period. The Mass, a commemoration and celebration of the Last Supper of Jesus Christ, was and still is to this day, a ceremony that included set texts, liturgy, which were spoken and sung. Gregorian chant is the central tradition of Western Plain chant, a form of monophonic, unaccompanied sacred song of the Roman Catholic Church. Gregorian chant developed mainly in the Frankish land of Western and Central Europe during the 9th and 10th centuries, with later additions and reductions. Although popular legend credits Pope Gregory the Great with inventing Gregorian chants, scholars believe that it arose from a later Carolingian synthesis of Roman and Caligan chant. Gregorian chant are organized into 8 scalar modes. Typical melody features included characteristic incipits and candices. The use of reciting tones around which the other notes of the melody revolve, and a vocabulary of musical motif woven together through a process called syntonization to create families of related chants. Play Proceedamos and Peace. The chant were also based on a system of modes which were characteristics of the medieval period. There were 8 church modes. You can play them by starting of a different white note on a piano and playing a scale of 8 notes on just for the white notes. For example, if you start on a D and play all the white notes up to the next D, an octave higher you will have played the Dorian mode. Proceedamos and Peace, or Let Us Proceed and Peace. The 8 church modes, 7 of them were given names identical to those used in the musical theory of ancient Greece. Dorian, Hyperdorian, Radian, Hyporadian, Ladian, Hypoladian, and Maxiladian, while the name of the eighth mode, Hypomoxiladian, was adapted from the Greek. Development of polyphonic music. As the medieval period progressed, composers began to experiment and polyphonic styles began to develop. It added an entire new body of work to sacred music, supplementing the chant and even replacing it on special occasions. The effects was somewhat different on secular music, where polyphonic music became the treasured repertory of the upper classes, creating a musical class distinction that had not existed previously.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, classmates. I am Roland Hope Arpento, tasked to report on organum and the sheet music in the medieval period. Now, let's start with an organum. What do we mean when we say organum? Okay, an organum was a crucial early technique which explored polyphonic texture. It consisted of two lines of voices in varying heterophonic textures. So, an organum is a type of early polyphony in which sacred chant is sung in a long-held unmetered notes in the lowest voice, referred to as the tenor, which means to hold. This is another plain chant-based musical style. For example, while one voice sings the primary chant melody, at least one other voice sings along to enhance the harmony. This style is important to musicians, especially music theorists, because it served as the foundation for the development of true counterpoint. These are the three main types of organum, which are the parallel organum, or also known as the strict organum, the free organum, and the third is the melimastic organum. In the parallel organum, one voice sings the melody while the other sings at a fixed interval. This gives us a parallel motion effect. A parallel organum is a polyphonic vocal piece made up of two melodic lines called vox principalis and vox originalis. Both melodies are applied to the same text and written in Latin, and use the same rhythmic values. After parallel organum, the next development to arise in the practice of organum is postulated to be that of free organum, and the second type is the free organum. Here, the two voices move in both parallel motion and or contrary motion. Although free organum is mostly isochronous, meaning that the two voices move in the same pace. There are examples of more than one note of the organal voice against one note in the tenor. Another precursor of contrapuntal techniques. Previously, technique may be said harmonically enhance and reinforce a single melodic line, which is why it is essentially heterophony. Free organum is a definite break with harmonically shadowing chant as it places a new line and contrasting harmony with the chant in the lower voice. And the third one is the melimastic organum. An accompanying part stays on a single note while the other part moves around above it. And the third one is melimastic organum. An accompanying part stays on a single note while the other part moves around above it. And the melimastic organum developed in Aquitania, and it linked to Saint Martial de Limoges. This form of organum is based on plain chant melody that is sung in extended note values in the lower voice, the length of which is determined by the length of the phrase in the original part. The next topic that I will discuss to you is on the sheet music in the medieval period. And what is this all about? On this, the Catholic Church wanted to standardize what people sang in churches across the Western world. Because the church had enormous influence over the people in the medieval period, and had the power to make laws and influence monarchs, which is why they had the authority to standardize what people sang in churches. As a, as a result of this, a system of musical notation developed, allowing things to move on from the previously oral tradition, which is tunes passed by ear and not written down. And this is all about regarding my report this afternoon. Thank you for lending me your ears, and I hope you will learn something and understand my report. Thank you.
Neumes. These were signs written above chants giving an indication of the direction of movement of pitch. So neumes is a prior to the creation of five-line staff notation, the basic element of Western and Eastern musical notation. The first neumes were inflective marks that showed the basic shape of the song but not always the specific notes or rhythms. According to dictionary, neumes is a sign created in the Middle Ages to notate plain song that can still be found in Gregorian chant transcriptions. Here on the screen is an example of an 11th century manuscript containing neumes. As the medieval period progressed, neumes developed gradually to add more indication of rhythm, etc. Instruments of the medieval period. There were a number of characteristic instruments of the medieval period, including first, the flutes made of woods. So medieval flutes looked more like the modern day recorder as they had holes for fingers rather than keys. The medieval flute is simply a cylindrical tube stopped at one end with a mouth hole and six finger holes. At its reappearance in the Middle Ages, it seems to have been especially popular in Germany. Next is the dulcimer. The medieval dulcimers were originally plucked, but then hit with hammers as technology developed. So the dulcimer is a late medieval instrument which is very much like the psaltery. The significant difference is that the strings of the dulcimer were struck with little hammers rather than being plucked. The dulcimer fell out of the use in Western Europe at the end of the Middle Ages, but continued in use to modern times in Eastern Europe as the cymbalum. So next is the lyra. The lyra is considered to be one of the first known bowed instruments. In the Byzantine Empire, the lyra was a medieval bowed string musical instrument that was a progenitor of most European bowed instruments including violin. So the lyra was a pear-shaped instrument with 3 to 5 strings that was held upright and played by stopping the strings with fingernails from the side. So other medieval instruments included the recorder and the lute. The period was also characterized by troubadours and trouvers. These were traveling singers and performers. So troubadours originally was a traveling musician. The first troubadours traveled from village to hamlet, and many also traveled internationally. Secular styles of medieval music. Ars nova or new art was a new style of music originating in France and Italy in the 14th century. Ars nova refers to a musical style which flourished in the Kingdom of France and its surroundings during the late Middle Ages. The term is sometimes used more generally to refer to all European polyphonic music of the 14th century. For instance, the term Italian Ars Nova is sometimes used to denote the music of Francesco Landini and his compatriots, although Trecento music is the more common term for the contemporary 14th century music in Italy. The name comes from a tract written by Philip de Vitry in c. 1320. The style was characterized by increased variety of rhythm, double time, and increased freedom and independence in part writing. These experimentations laid some of the foundations for further musical development during the Renaissance period. The main secular genre of art nova was the chanson. The word chanson means song in the French language. Chanson music refers to various eras of French song, from the monophonic chant of the Middle Ages to polyphonic singing of the Renaissance. Modern chanson music connects 19th century cabaret music in Paris to contemporary pop music. Each iteration of chanson offers distinctive characteristics. Examples of Art Nouveau composers include Machotte in France, a French poet and musician greatly admired by contemporaries as a master of French versification and regarded as one of the leading French composers of the Ars Nova musical style of the 14th century, and Giovanni da Cascia, an Italian composer of the medieval era, active in the middle of the 14th century, J. de Bologna and Landini in Italy.